You thought this feeling would go away once they finally noticed you, once the applause came, once the praise filled the room. But instead of joy, you felt hollow. Instead of peace, confusion. Because deep down, you expected the recognition to fix something, to finally make you feel seen, to finally make you feel real. But here's the truth. No one wants to say out loud. Sometimes, success feels like failure in disguise. Because when you're celebrated for something that isn't fully you, the applause can feel louder than your soul. Alan Watts once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." And when the world celebrates a version of you that you had to build to survive, that you had to polish to be loved, that you had to perform to be accepted, then all the noise just makes the silence inside you louder. Let's begin. They love the mask, not the person. You spent years becoming what they wanted. You learned to be impressive. You learned to be inspiring. You became excellent at making people proud. But here's the quiet tragedy. They didn't fall in love with you. They fell in love with the role you played, the character you perfected. And when you're alone with your thoughts, there's a strange ache in your chest. Not sadness, not exactly emptiness. It's the grief of being unseen, even in the middle of a spotlight, because they love your smile. But they don't notice the cracks beneath it. They praise your confidence, but don't see how hard you try to stay strong. They want your light, but ignore your shadow. And so you wonder, what happens if I stop performing? What happens if I stop achieving? Would they still stay? The silent pressure to keep earning love. When people admire you for what you do, not for who you are, it trains your nervous system into a loop of survival. You don't rest because rest feels like failure. You don't say no because boundaries feel like rejection. You don't cry because you've been taught that tears ruin the image. You live with this unspoken rule in your head. If I stop being useful, they'll leave. This is how trauma hides in success. This is how wounds wear medals. This is how people with trophies feel worthless at night. You become addicted to achievement, not because you're greedy, but because it's the only time you feel safe in their love. And the scariest part? You might not even know you're doing it. Because from the outside, you look motivated. You look driven. You look like the person everyone wants to be. But inside, you're exhausted, disconnected, floating in a life that looks beautiful, but doesn't feel like home. You learned to earn worth, not feel it. Maybe when you were young, love had conditions. Praise came when you were good. Attention came when you succeeded. Safety came when you didn't cause problems. And now, that blueprint is still running your life. You became the overachiever. Because being excellent was the only way you felt loved. You became the perfectionist because flaws were punished, so you hid them behind greatness. You became the helper because pleasing others felt like the only way to be accepted. But here's the secret no one told you. Love that you have to earn will always leave you empty because your soul is starving for something deeper, to be loved without needing to prove anything. And until that hunger is fed, no amount of praise will ever be enough. You fear losing the image more than losing yourself. You've worked so hard to be respected, admired, valued, but now you're trapped. Because if you slow down, they'll question you. If you show weakness, they'll gossip. If you stop giving, they might stop calling. And so you keep dancing, keep achieving, keep smiling through the exhaustion. But deep down, you know, you're not living anymore. You're just maintaining an image. And here's the brutal truth. An image will never hold you when you break. A reputation will never wipe your tears. A spotlight will never know how to love the real you. What you crave isn't fame. It's connection. You don't actually want 1 million followers. You want one person who truly gets you. You don't want endless recognition. You want rest. You don't want to impress everyone. You want to be allowed to be imperfect and still be loved. This is why being celebrated can feel so lonely, because you're surrounded by eyes, but none of them really see you. And the applause gets quieter each time, because your soul knows this isn't the kind of love you need. But here's where it shifts. The first step out of this prison isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It starts the moment you whisper to yourself, "I'm allowed to exist," without performing. It's the moment you stop chasing their love and start returning to your own. And yes, it's terrifying, because the version of you they love is not the version that's breaking. But the only way back to your wholeness is through the silence, through the surrender, through the pain of being misunderstood on your way to being truly seen. And that journey begins right now. But here's the hidden danger. When you're always told you're amazing, when you're celebrated for your looks, your talent, your voice, or your intellect, it's easy to confuse admiration for connection. Applause becomes a substitute for intimacy. But applause never holds you at night. It never listens to your doubts. It never asks how you're really doing. And that's the moment it starts. A quiet emptiness hidden behind success. You post a photo, hundreds of likes. You tell a story, people cheer. But when the lights go out, you're still alone with your thoughts. And maybe you start to wonder, if they knew the real me, not the curated version, would they still care? This is the beginning of emotional dissonance, when the love you receive is only for your mask. Because being celebrated can feel like love, but it's not the kind that stays when your hands shake, when your voice trembles, or when you admit you're lost. You see, people often celebrate what you represent, but only a few are willing to hold space for who you are. And when your worth becomes tied to being impressive, being human starts to feel like a threat. The invisible weight of being enough. Every time you succeed, the standard rises. Every time you shine, the world expects a brighter version. And somewhere inside, you begin to fear. If I ever stop being impressive, will they stop clapping? So you hustle. Not because you're ambitious, but because you're scared. Scared that slowing down means disappearing. This is where the emptiness deepens, because you're no longer living for yourself. You're performing, not out of joy, but out of fear. Not out of meaning, but out of survival. You smile wider, speak more confidently, say what they want to hear. Until one day, you realize you've become a character in your own life, a highlight reel of someone who forgot how to just be. And that is exhausting, because the more you become what they admire, the further you drift from what your soul actually needs, craving the applause that hurts you. Here's the painful paradox. Even when you know the applause is hollow, you still chase it, because validation is addictive, especially when you're lonely. The comments, the compliments, the attention, they give you a hit of meaning. But like sugar, it fades fast and leaves a crash. Alan Watts once said, "No one is more dangerously insane than one who is sane all the time. He is like a steel bridge without flexibility, and the order of his life is rigid and brittle." When you only allow yourself to be one thing, the successful one, the funny one, the beautiful one, you fracture your soul. And over time, you begin to resent your own reputation, because you no longer own it. It owns you. You no longer live your life. You manage your image. The loneliness of being praised. The world claps for your victories, but they fall immense during your confusion. People want your confidence, not your questions. They want your sparkle, not your shadow. And so, you learn to hide the parts of you that don't inspire. The doubt, the tiredness, the ache. You keep them buried. And with each buried truth, you become more alone. Because here's the truth. No one says out loud. Being celebrated isolates you, not because people don't love you, but because they only love the parts that serve them. You become a lighthouse to others, but no one notices that you're running out of light. The mirror that doesn't lie. At some point, you'll look in the mirror and wonder, who am I? When no one's watching, when no one's listening, when I'm not being extraordinary. Can I still love myself when I'm average, when I'm quiet, when I'm not on? If you struggle to answer that, you're not broken. You're waking up. Because true fulfillment doesn't come from being admired. It comes from being known. And to be known, you must first know yourself. Beyond the spotlight, beyond the expectations, beyond the carefully crafted persona. You must meet the parts of you that you've edited out. The soft ones, the scared ones, the silent ones. Because those are the parts that need love the most. And until you reclaim them, no amount of success will feel like enough. When achievement becomes armor. Success is beautiful, but when it becomes armor, it stops being a gift. You wear it to protect your wounds, to prove your worth, to say, I'm okay, look at all I've done. But inside, you're still asking, would they stay if I had nothing? That's the question that haunts those who've always been celebrated, because they've never had the chance to find out. There's another way. What if you stopped trying to impress them? What if you allowed yourself to be ordinary? What if you let someone see your messy thoughts, your anxious heart, your unfiltered voice, and they stayed? Not because you wowed them, but because you were real. What would it feel like to be loved without the performance? That's not weakness. That's freedom. And maybe the real healing begins when you stop seeking applause and start seeking truth, because applause fades. But truth, once found, stays. And once you find someone who sees your truth, you'll finally understand. You were never meant to be a performance. You were meant to be a person. And that person is already enough. The applause that feeds the ache. It's strange how the moments you once prayed for, the spotlight, the compliments, the silent nods of approval, can become the very echo that keeps you up at night. People see the version of you that's already finished. They praise the success, the glow, the clarity, but they never witnessed the nights you wrestled with self-doubt, the tears that fell in private, the quiet moments where you almost gave up. And so you smile. You say thank you. But deep down, the applause feels disconnected, not because it's fake, but because it arrived too late. It's not celebrating who you are, but who you had to become just to survive. Alan Watts once said, "There will always be suffering, but we must not suffer over the suffering." And that is the paradox. Most people who are praised the most carry the deepest private grief, not because they're broken, but because they were once so overlooked. They built greatness just to be noticed. The mask of wholeness, being seen as strong, is a quiet prison. It means no one checks in. It means everyone assumes you're fine. It means even when you're falling apart, you do it with grace, because the world has never known how to hold your pain. You become the therapist, the helper, the reliable one, until one day you wonder, what would happen if I stopped being useful? Would they still love me? That question haunts the celebrated, because deep down, you don't just want admiration. You want understanding. You want someone to say, "I know what it cost you to smile today. I see beyond your strength." But in a world addicted to performance, vulnerability becomes the enemy of perception. And so, you become more polished, more eloquent, more perfect, but less you. When success becomes survival. Sometimes the most talented people didn't chase success out of ambition. They chased it out of survival, because being excellent was the only way to feel safe. Being perfect was the only way to avoid being forgotten. So you learned to smile while performing. You learned to carry others so no one would see your own needs. You became the one who always had answers, so no one would ask questions about what you were really going through. But here's the secret. The person you had to become was always a shield. A beautiful, brilliant, polished shield. And now, you're tired of holding it. The echo of being misunderstood. The more you're celebrated for things that don't feel like you, the more hollow it becomes. It's like hearing your name, but not recognizing the person they're clapping for. You begin to shrink silently, not out of ungratefulness, but out of confusion. If this version of me is loved, what happens to the real one underneath? And suddenly, success feels like a betrayal. Not because it's untrue, but because it forced you to abandon parts of yourself just to reach it. This is the quiet grief of the emotionally intelligent, of the gifted, of those who became what the world needed, before they ever discovered who they really were. The mirror that doesn't reflect. External validation is a mirror with a delay. By the time it reflects who you are, you've already changed. So while they're celebrating your last chapter, you're grieving the parts of you they'll never know. And here lies the silent loneliness. They adore the role you played, but they missed the person who lived it. They celebrate the results, but never the recovery. They quote your words, but never sat with your silence. And you smile, because it's easier than explaining that even when everyone knows your name, you can still feel completely invisible. The final realization. You were never meant to be understood by everyone. Let's pause. What if this emptiness is not a sign that something is wrong with you, but proof that your soul is ready for something deeper. What if the loneliness that follows recognition is not a curse, but an invitation? Not everyone will understand your depth. Not everyone is meant to. Because the ones who truly see you don't just applaud your victories. They sit with your shadows. They remember your laughter and your quiet. They see your becoming, not just your becoming famous. So maybe the real treasure is not in being celebrated, but in being known. Not by everyone, but by the few who ask, "How are you, really?" and wait long enough to hear the real answer. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you felt seen? Not for your performance, but for your presence. And if the answer feels distant, maybe it's time to let go of the version they admire so you can finally return to the person you miss. That's where wholeness begins.